everybody and welcome. Very warm welcome for Mr. Colling this week, and real pleasure to talk to you and to take your assembly. I wanted to start by congratulating you and thanking you for what you've achieved since the school closed at the beginning of term. You've shown huge amounts of flexibility, tremendous amounts of hard work and commitment. It's astonishing to think that you very quickly adapted to new ways of learning and done it with a smile, tried hard and managed to find motivation to keep going. It's really important we don't lose sight of that. It's been very difficult for the staff and for the school to adapt as well, as I'm sure you can imagine. But we recognise that this is your education. We're not just marking time. We can't assume that we'll catch up somehow in the future. We've got to make sure that what we're doing at the moment really counts. So your engagement in this is really important, and I'm really proud of what you've achieved so far. Well done. Many people have likened the pandemic to a world war. The magnitude of the situation is very similar. The impact across the world of the pandemic is only really matched by something of the scale of a world war. It's also a tragic situation that's been forced upon us. It's not something that we've done for ourselves. It's a situation we found ourselves in, and we've got to try and deal with that. The other fact is that it's something which is affecting every single person across the world. I can't imagine there's anywhere in the world that hasn't been affected, and that every person in every country is having to deal with the same problems as ourselves. That's what makes it tragic, but it's also quite unifying in a way. It brings people together to think that we're all in this same situation. We're all trying to cope. We're all trying to find ways of making sure that we survive and that we can look after each other in that way. It's very important that society pulls together to find solutions to the situation so that we can all get back to some sense of normality. At least in the pandemic, unlike the world wars, countries can unite in the same problem and find ways of solving that between us rather than actually fighting one another. So in that sense, there is some positivity comparing it with the world war. The other thing that I wanted to focus on for the next few minutes that likens the pandemic to a world war are some of the advances that we have to make. I'm going to explain that over the next couple of slides for you. As a result of the world wars, a number of things were advanced, particularly in terms of medical science. And although some of these things that you can see on the slide here, penicillin, blood transfusions, skin grafts, antibacterial treatments, were all things that were being developed already, there was suddenly an acceleration for their development as a result of the world wars because of the magnitude of injury and suffering and illness and death that resulted in that situation. The war presented us with an incentive to work really quickly to advance in these areas so that we could help people's survival and help to ensure that they were able to recover from the situation they were in. There were also technological advances. Microwaves you would take for granted now as being a way of heating up your tea, heating up a bowl of soup or cooking your dinner. But that wasn't where they came from originally. This came from developments of radar so that we could actually spot enemy planes and so on, and also from sonar detecting underwater threats such as submarines. It was really by accident that radar and sonar led to the development of microwaves that could then be used for cooking, but nevertheless something which we all take for granted as something as being very important and useful to us today. I'm sure many of you will know a lot about the development of computers and some of the work that was done in code breaking in Bletchley and how that led to big advances in machines that could carry out calculations very, very quickly to help us break the code of messages that Germans were transmitting. Again, it wasn't something that we set out to achieve to produce the sorts of computers that we all use today and the sort of computer that I'm using to record your assembly on, and probably the machine that you're using to hear it. But nevertheless, that's something which has come from the developments that took place in the Second World War. So almost by accident, we've seen huge advances out of a really, really tragic and difficult situation. And I think there's something to be said for that, which has got to be positive. And we need to think about some of the positives in the world we're in at the moment, when there's so much negativity and what seems to be catastrophe around us. We need to be able to say, what can we take from this that's going to be a benefit to us in the long run? We've already heard a lot in the news about the development of the vaccine. I don't know of a time when a vaccine went from the early stages of development right through to being approved and actually to being injected into people's arms as rapidly as has been the case with the current vaccines that we're using for this particular disease. Normally, the process takes a long, long time, and it's raised the question for me, why does it need to take so long? When the incentive is there for this to be done quickly, it's been possible. So why can't we make some of these advances happen more quickly in ordinary circumstances? There's been rapid testing of COVID, and we're already doing that in school, and rapid by means of the results coming through very, very quickly. This is very, very recent that we've been able to do this. It works in a similar sort of process to that of a pregnancy test and enables people very, very quickly to tell whether they are suffering with the COVID virus or not. The impact of that is hugely positive, because if somebody knows that they have the virus, then they can take steps to keep other people around them safe. But it also has the potential to allow people to understand that they are negative and that they're not at risk, and can help to reduce the level of worry that they may have. We've all thought a huge amount about hygiene, regular hand washing, thorough hand washing, taking 20 seconds and washing in a way that actually gets all of the bacteria and virus off our hands is a big advancement. And many people have talked anecdotally about the fact that far fewer people seem to have had other common colds and other sorts of illnesses, probably because we're paying a lot more attention to hygiene. The amount of bacteria that you might pick up just going to the supermarket is probably nothing we've ever thought about before. But now, I wonder how many people would go around the supermarket with a trolley before they've wiped the handle and before they've sanitised their hands. It's now something which we do commonplace, and it's the sort of thing that can make a big difference in terms of helping to keep people healthy and safe. I really hope this is something we continue to do in the future, because there is great benefit. More so in the last lockdown, last March, than in the current one, there was a big difference in the amount of traffic on the roads. And it was commented then that this was having an immediate impact on the amount of greenhouse gas that was being emitted into the atmosphere. Far fewer cars on the road meant there was less carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides that were being emitted into the atmosphere. And that was having a measurable effect on the greenhouse effect and on the climate in our countries. Again, something very positive, and there is a legacy of that, because a lot more people now are working from home. I'm sure many of you know, as I do, people who've been working from home since last March who've never gone back into the office. A lot of my friends are in that situation because the nature of the jobs that they do means that they don't need to. There are downsides to that, of course, because they miss the social interaction of working with people and seeing them and having a change of scene. But there are these positive outcomes in terms of the reduction in traffic and pollution, and enabling them to use their time more wisely, less time sitting behind the wheel of a car or on a train commuting, and more time to use either for their work or for leisure. So again, another impact of the pandemic, which is not all bad. On a local level, we've had to learn new skills. I'm using PowerPoint and putting a voiceover, something I couldn't do a few months ago. I've had to learn how to do that because of the pandemic. We've had longer lessons in school during last term, and the staggered breaks where different year groups have taken breaks at different times. And there have been some benefits of those. And again, we would never have even thought about doing either of those things if it weren't for the fact that we were forced into it to enable everybody to remain safe in school. So we are doing what we thought was impossible, or what we didn't think was necessary. But the outcome of it is to say, actually, we've learned a lot, we've benefited a lot from some of these things, and so there are things that we can put in place to be there permanently for the future. Many of you were kind enough to respond to my survey, which we sent out on email. Nearly 500 of you replied to that, and a large number of you were saying you really liked the longer lessons, you liked the staggered breaks. There were many benefits to be seen from that, and yet we would never have even considered those things if it weren't for the fact that we had to because of this pandemic. On that note, we are considering your responses carefully, and we're making some decisions about what we'll do in the future, and we'll let you know about that once that work is finished. But I wanted to use it as an example of something that we have learnt from as a result of this awful situation. I don't want you to think for one moment that I'm suggesting that world war or a pandemic are good things. Far from it. Both bring huge amounts of suffering and misery. This pandemic is an awful situation, and so many people have become really ill or have died. And if you've lost somebody in this pandemic, then I send you my greatest kind thoughts as I understand the misery that can be caused from losing a loved one. I'd like you to have a think, however, about the current situation. Think about what you can do. We have to find the positive things out of this. I've given you some examples that may help to start you thinking. But I'd like you to have a think about what you can do yourselves. And one of those things is to consider what are the positive things, what have you learned, what have you been able to do that you wouldn't have done if we weren't in this situation, and how is that going to have a positive impact for you in the future. Please do your bit to support the national reduction in the transmission of the virus. I'm encouraging friends of mine to have the vaccination. My dad already, because he's over 80, has had his first vaccination. And I hope that many of your relatives too will have had that opportunity. We need to do our bit to make sure that as many people can have the vaccine as possible so that we can help to reduce the number of people who are at risk of serious illness or death. What we also need to do is to make sure we're doing our bit to avoid the transmission of the virus from person to person. Maintain social distancing at all times. It's really hard. If you're with other people, it seems rude to keep 2 meters from them or to ask them to step back. But that's what we have to do. We have to wear our masks when we're out. I'm still amazed to see how many people in shops are not wearing masks and nobody seems to be doing anything about it, and yet they could be protecting other people and themselves simply by putting a mask on for the 5 or 10 minutes that they are in that particular shop. Please make sure you continue with your own hand hygiene, hand washing. Please don't mix with other people during this lockdown. Stay in your lockdown bubble within your home. Keep yourselves safe, keep other people safe. And it's especially important for those young people who are what are known as vectors of transmission. It's known now that many young people maybe don't suffer the same side effects of the virus and don't suffer the same illness as a result of the virus that some older people do. But that doesn't stop them passing the virus on from one person to another and therefore putting others at risk. So please do your bit in that. I'd like you to think about some of the things that I've talked about in the Assembly. Maybe do some reading for yourself. What else came out of the world wars? What else is coming out of this pandemic that has helped us to advance as a society? And also to think for yourselves about what good has come out of the situation in terms of your own advancement, your own learning. That may be difficult. It may be that you're feeling at the moment that there's very little positive that's come out of it and you can't wait to get back to normal. And I completely understand that. And I sympathise with that tremendously. However, we can be positive, we can support each other in being positive, and we can get through this situation together. And I'm really, really very genuinely looking forward to seeing everybody back in school as soon as we're able. That will be a wonderful day. Enjoy your week, continue to work hard, and if you're struggling to find the motivation to do all the work that's being set, try to get started. Try to get yourself back on track, because this really is important for you. This is your education and it does matter. All the very best with what you're doing for this week, and I'll look forward to hearing more about how you're getting on.